airport in New York after it emerged that 11 refugees were being detained there. Under Mr. Trump's executive order, refugees from countries like Syria are banned until further notice, and citizens from a total of 7 majority Muslim countries will be denied visas for 90 days. Our correspondent in Washington, Gary O'Donoghue, reports.
Released after a night in detention, Hamid Khalid Darwish is one of the first to feel the bite of Donald Trump's crackdown on immigration.
America is the greatest nation, the greatest people in the world.
Mr. Darwish got his visa to come to America on the very day Donald Trump was inaugurated. He worked for a decade as an interpreter for the US military in Iraq and was awarded a special immigration visa for those who had served. His release followed lobbying by human rights groups and a member of Congress.
Donald Trump, our president, doesn't get it. This is wrong, and we're going to fight it right here on the streets. We're going to fight it in courts, and we're going to fight it every place and in every corner of America. This is not who we are.
The United States.
It's just a day since Donald Trump ended his first frenetic week by fulfilling his promise to impose tough new immigration rules aimed at predominantly Muslim countries. Rules, he says, that will keep America safe from terrorism.
I'm establishing new vetting measures to keep radical Islamic terrorists out of the United States of America. We don't want them here.
People from Libya, Sudan, Somalia, Yemen, Syria, Iraq and Iran cannot enter the US for 90 days, even if they have a valid visa. All refugees will be kept out for 120 days, with the annual limit of around 100,000 halved in future. Syrian refugees will be barred from America indefinitely. This Iraqi-born software engineer has been advised to stay put.
I, in fact, had trips planned for yesterday and next week that I was going to go to Africa for business, and I had to suspend all my travel and basically just sit still, and that's how I ended up in Boston. I wasn't planning to be in Boston, but I'm now here and you know, waiting to see what's going to happen without really a plan for where to go next.
It's also emerged that people with a green card could also be banned from those 7 named countries, despite the fact that the card gives you rights to employment and residence in the US. It's a move that could split families.
There was one case where a wife was traveling back to Iran to visit her sick father, leaving behind her husband and their 2-month-old son, and now she is stuck in Iran and cannot get back to see her family. Again, went through the appropriate legal channels, is a permanent resident green card holder, and can't come back to see her family.
No fascist USA!
Donald Trump's immigration policy has brought condemnation from human rights groups and political opponents. But his tough rhetoric was one of the most important factors in his election victory, and he seems determined to follow through with it. Gary O'Donoghue, BBC News, Washington.
This is BBC News. I'm Tom Donkin. The latest headlines. Protests in the United States and a legal challenge as Donald Trump signs an executive order banning migrants and refugees from several Muslim countries. And a federal judge issues an emergency stay order that temporarily blocks the government from deporting people who land with valid visas. Well, the reaction to President Donald Trump's new immigration bans from European and Middle Eastern governments has been almost entirely negative. The Iranian government has decided to stop issuing new visas to Americans in retaliation. However, leaders and parties on the far right have given it their support. Bill Hayton has this report.
An annual rally of the Golden Dawn Party in Athens. Around 800 Greek nationalists gathered to denounce Turkey, the European Union and migrants. And they like the sound of President Trump's new immigration controls.
Our country is an open field. Everyone can come whenever they want and they can leave whenever they want. We would like to follow a policy like Donald Trump is doing in the States right now.
The leader of the Dutch Party for Freedom, Geert Wilders, also gave his support for the policy and called for it to go further. But in the corridors of power, the reaction was opposite. Speaking after their meeting in Paris, the French and German foreign ministers spoke out strongly against Mr. Trump's move.
Loving your neighbour is a major Christian value, and that includes helping people. I think that's what unites us in the West, and I think that's still a common foundation that we share with the United States, and we want to make that clear.
The intergovernmental organisation set up after the Second World War to help migrants says targeting refugees will not increase the security of Americans.
We understand there are issues involved with what's happening in some of these countries, but historically, danger does not come from refugees, and we don't have much of a record of dangerous people infiltrating with refugees. And these are checked so thoroughly for years, literally, that we think that it's an unfair kind of distinction.
There are nearly 5 million Syrian refugees living abroad, unable to go home and unable to earn a living. They want a better life.
We want to go to the United States to live in peace and security. I'm a pharmacist and I want to use my degree. The Arab countries don't recognize my degree. Here in Jordan, we're suffering because my children cannot get an education.
But with anti-foreigner movements on the march in many countries, there's no easy answer to the problems of so many stranded families. Bill Hayton, BBC News.
Well, the White House has described an hour-long phone call between Donald Trump and President Putin as a significant first step towards improving relations between the US and Russia. Mr. Trump has also signed a presidential memorandum on the plan to defeat the so-called Islamic State. As Gary O'Donoghue explains, it includes the possibility of teaming up with new coalition partners, suggesting that cooperating with Russia on counter-terrorism certainly isn't off the table.
Very interesting. We were sort of expecting this, but effectively what he's done, he's asked the Defence Department and other parts of the national security establishment here, which he's slightly rearranging, he's moving the furniture around a little bit, but he's asked them to come up with a plan within 30 days for the defeat of ISIS. And it goes through various things he wants to look at, cyber techniques, etc., possible military action, but also it does talk about reaching out to new coalition partners. And of course that will be read by many people as an indication that he's prepared, for example, inside Syria to cooperate more with Russia on hitting ISIS. Now, that also comes on the day, of course, when he spoke to President Putin for the first time after becoming president. We're told they had an hour-long phone call. We're told it was very positive, and this idea of looking at joint ways of defeating the Islamic State group came up in that call as well. So there's some choreography here, if you like. Donald Trump does look like he's potentially thinking, at any rate, of trying to use Vladimir Putin as an ally in the fight against ISIS.
He's had a very busy week, Donald Trump. He's been signing these executive orders, but the American courts could also be very busy very soon because a lot of opponents to this executive order want to take him to court and overturn it. How likely is that going to be?
I think there will be challenges to that, particularly on the immigration and refugee measures. Some people will say, you know, the American Constitution doesn't allow for discrimination, and some people will say that this is discriminatory on religious grounds, for example. I think there will be challenges on that score. We saw the first of those today in a Brooklyn court relating to these two Iraqi men. A lot of people will be concerned that that this is un-American. Donald Trump's view is, look, I'm trying to protect the American people. It's my first duty. And if that means stopping people coming in the country, then so be it. And of course, there is a lot of America that will agree with that at the moment.
That was Gary O'Donoghue in Washington. Well, let's stay in Washington and speak to Dr. Trita Parsi. He's the founder and the president of the National Iranian American Council, and he's frequently consulted by foreign governments on foreign policy matters. Dr. Parsi, thank you very much for joining us. I just first want to get your reaction to the past 24 hours or so, and what have other Iranian Americans been saying to you?
People are absolutely stunned and bewildered that this is happening. Clearly, there was an expectation that something would happen, but the idea that the Trump administration would start targeting people who have permanent residence in the United States is something that was beyond the imagination of anyone. And at the same time, this frustration that this is now being justified on the basis of security Well, mindful of the fact that 0 American fatalities in terrorist attacks on U.S. soils have been caused by citizens from these 7 countries, whereas there are plenty of American allies whose citizens have committed such acts, is something that is furthering the frustration that, that is coming with this new order.
According to the Department of Homeland Security, of the 7 countries that are affected by this, Iran sends the most visitors to the U.S. So this has got to have a huge implication for people traveling to and from the U.S. from Iran.
Absolutely. This is Iranians are receiving about 48% of the total of visas of these 7 countries. As a result, they're almost larger than all of the others combined. So this is affecting our community more than any. But at the same time, I think what we've seen today is that people across the United States from all different communities are really rising up and protesting against this. And I think there's part